we are on our final week of discussions. Hopefully you guys have had time to do some review or to do your hands-on activities. I admit I have not done much with hands-on activities, but I've been doing a lot of reviewing of stuff. And I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. My exam is tomorrow morning at 10:15 a.m. So we'll see how it goes. Agenda today, I actually threw a couple of subjects on just that from reading other people's blogs that had passed the exams. They mentioned this stuff, or they were topics that were listed like in the practice exam guide. So I wanted to copy the cover those real quickly. And then we're going to go into a bunch of compare and contrast scenarios. It's literally going to be pick two things and let's talk about what's the same, what's different, when would you use which one. And as I was compiling a list of the different things to compare, I think I came up with like 20 things, and there's no way if we have everybody talk on every one that we're going to be done by 9 o'clock. So we're going to do a modified round robin there, just so we can hopefully get through all the topics still and get everybody ready for their exam. Jeff, I think you said you're taking it like tomorrow or later this week. Is that right?
I've got it tomorrow afternoon.
Okay. Anybody else taking it this week or next week? Anybody muted and just not talking? Okay. All right. Well, I encourage you guys, if you've been studying along, to get it done while the material is fresh, while you still got some peer pressure here to keep you going. But let's jump right into it. So we're going to start with Base64 Encoding. A couple of the blogs I read all said Base64 Encoding was covered on the exam. I didn't see it in any of the study resources we were given. But basically what it is it's a way of transmitting binary data over the network and making sure that it doesn't get corrupted in transmission. And why would it get corrupted is depending on how different servers maybe are passing the data along or receiving the data. They might treat a binary character as some sort of like special escape character and maybe try to interpret it as text, and you could get a corrupt binary file at the other end. So what Base64 Encoding does is it takes binary data and converts it into text data. And then on the other end, you decode it back into binary form. I'm not going to go into all the details of how it works. So this is literally like the Reader's Digest version of what I read about it. Hopefully this will be enough to, if it comes up on the exam, that you'll be able, this information will be enough to help you get through the exam question. Basically, for every 3 bytes of data that you're sending across, it takes 4 bytes of data to store that information in text form versus binary form. So think of it as like 33% overhead, so to speak. It uses the safest characters in the universal character set, uppercase and lowercase A through Z, the numbers 0 to 9, pluses, forward slashes. It also uses an equal sign as a padding character. There's multiple variants of Base64, but the majority of them, this is kind of what they use. And in Salesforce, there's a class called Encoding Util, and it has 2 methods. One is Base64 Decode, which takes a string and gives you a binary large object back. And the other one is Base64 Encode, which when you're preparing to transmit binary data, you convert it to a string first. And there's a link at the bottom of that slide where you can read all the nitty-gritty under the cover, under the hood stuff on how binary gets encoded into string. It's kind of cool, actually, but probably way deeper than we need to go with it. Has anybody had experience with this beyond me just like telling you about it?
Well, this is the way attachments are actually stored in Salesforce.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if files are, but attachment, if you pull out the attachment, there's a big blob, which is the document, which is really the Base64 for it. So you just unencode it and you get your document back. I've not dug in deep enough to see if files does it the same way. I think it does because of the transmission. You basically just encode it and then stick it in the database as a big string.
Okay. So in the Salesforce database, even though it's a blob, which stands for binary large object, by the way, if you don't know, even though it says blob, it's actually like an encoded string, and when you render it back is when it gets encoded back again or decoded.
So you basically pull it out with your normal CRUD operation, and then you run a decode on it, and essentially can get back your document.
Oh, okay. There you have it, folks. Anybody else want to add anything on this? Again, know what it is, know how it works. Basically, if you're transmitting binary data, convert it to text first using Base64 encoding, send it across the wire, decode it on the other side. All right, another thing that came up, this was one of the mock exam questions in the study guide, but on the trail mix itself, there was nothing about email services. So I thought, well, we better touch on email services a little bit. It's exactly what it says on the screen here. It's a bunch of special purpose processes that use Apex classes to process incoming mail messages. If you've ever used email to case, or if you're using Salesforce email services to automatically attach emails to contacts and accounts, you're using email services. And in addition to the built-in email to case features, lead to case, just attaching emails, you can also create your own email service and create your own logic with it. It's basically a 3-step process. You create an Apex class. It has to implement this inbound email handler interface. And then you declaratively create an email service and associate the service with that Apex class you created. And then you create one of those really long cryptic email addresses so that when a message comes into that email address, your Apex class will process that email according to the logic you've cooked into it. Again, there's a link to learn more about it, but just know that email services is a way to process incoming email and do all sorts of fun stuff with it. Has anybody ever done any custom email service implementation?
Yeah, we have a number of them. We use them for approvals. So when you send out an approval for multiple different documents, this is not part of the standard approval. We have our own custom approvals. So the email goes out, comes back to a service with their response, any comments they want to put into that, it processes that and essentially closes out the approval. We probably have 9 or 10 services doing this.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I've done it as well, and it's been several years since I implemented it, but if I remember right, we took an incoming email and created a chatter post with a file attachment, I believe, with using an email service.
Okay. The mock exam scenario it mentioned is one that we've run into in implementations that we've had, where Salesforce by default, it will associate emails with cases, but it will associate the attachment with the email itself, not with the case, which is highly annoying because you probably want the attachment right at the case level. And so that's one very common cause where you could use that is you have an email service that take the attachment, attach it right to the case instead of to the email. And the link at the bottom of the slide, they've got a cool example where they take an inbound message and all the people like on the addressee line, they convert them to contacts and accounts and stuff. So pretty interesting example. Take a look at it when you have a chance. Again, it's more, the bottom line is it's a way to process incoming email and can be highly customizable. All right, I'm going to switch over, see if anybody else needs to be let in, and they don't. Welcome. Thanks for those who are waiting to be let in. I thought we had Ladies Be Architects set up to let everybody into calls, but apparently that's still not working. Governor limits, I don't know if this is going to come up on the exam or not, but just some numbers that would probably be good for us to know about, just because sometimes they talk about this stuff. So send email, this goes back to the email services. On the slide, I talked mostly about how do you handle incoming emails with email services, but you can also use email services to send out emails. And one of the important, very low limits I came across is in a single transaction, you can only invoke send email 10 times. Which isn't very much. So again, it's a case of bulkify your code, create a list, and then use send email, sending in the entire list, rather than invoking send email inside a for loop. Just good developer practices all over again. SOCL query limits seem to come up on every exam, so just remember those. 100 if you're going synchronous, You get double that if you go asynchronous. 100 callouts per transaction because this is an integration exam. That one might come up. And a cumulative timeout. Now there's a timeout for a single callout, which can max out at 60 seconds. But if you're doing multiple callouts in a single transaction, your cumulative timeout is only 120 seconds. So if you have 2 transactions that you each take 60 seconds, you've used your limit. And heaven help you if you have a third call out you still have to make in your transaction. Anybody think of any other limits that might be important to know? Nobody's got anything. All right. And then bulk API, just remember 10,000. Everything around bulk API seems to run around 10,000. 10,000 records in a batch, 10,000 batches in a rolling 24-hour period. Bulk API 2.0 might have a higher limit. I want to say because 10,000 times 10,000 is what, however many million records. But I seem to remember bulk API 2.0 was actually a bigger number than that. But look that up in your free time. Ha ha.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing this too, that it looks like it's a lot bigger. It says that it's been increased to 100 million records in a 24-hour period.
Okay.
So it's records as well as megabytes of Base64 encoded data. And I think that's where you're going to go next. So I'm going to pause right here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, megabytes, good point. So it's not just the records, it's how big are your record sizes that you're trying to send in. Okay, and then I didn't add a slide in, but I wanted to talk about sandboxes briefly, because one of the other things I saw the blogs mention is know what your different sandboxes are used for. So, again, we've got developer, which is your day-to-day development work, your developer pro, which is maybe some integration between development options, partial, great for integration, testing, user training, and your full sandbox for regression testing and staging practice. Anybody want to lend any more input on that one? Oh, you're a quiet crowd tonight. Okay, so those of you that joined a little later, as I mentioned, we have 20 slides of compare and contrast coming up next. And there's no way if everybody talks on every slide, we're going to get through this before 9 o'clock is over. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to pick on 3 people on each slide as kind of the it people. And then if anybody else wants to add their inputs after that, we'll do that. And basically, if you're looking at the people on the call, we're going to go in the order you appear on the list. Although I'm not sure who's dialing in on the 224 number. So who is that? That you're dialed?
Yeah, this is Surbi.
Oh, Surbi, hi. Okay, we know who our mystery caller is now. You can't hide. Okay.
Yeah, I dialed in and it later let me in the Hangout. So I was like, okay, it is working now.
Okay, good. Oh, you're on there the other way too. You're double dipping. Cool. All right. So basically, every slide after this is going to have this versus that, and they're going to be related things. And so because the exam in several places said discuss trade-offs, design options, and things, this is going to be a discussion on design options and trade-offs and pros and cons of similar things. And so on each slide, as you're looking at it, these are kind of the questions you want to keep in mind. How are these things similar? How are they different? What are the pros and cons? What are the use cases, major differences? Are there any gotchas we need to know about one or the other? So without further ado, I'm going to bring up the first slide. Oh, and there's my missing sandboxes slide, but we already got past that. So the next slide I bring up, it's going to be Svatka, Terry, and Atul are going to be the 3 people that I'm going to put on the spot. And then after that, we'll open it up to the group. So Svatka, you get to go first. Tell us anything you want about remote site settings versus named credentials.
I shouldn't have dialed as the last person, what you're saying. That is too funny. All right, so remote site settings versus name credentials. I have used remote site settings in the past, and it's basically to specify an outbound URL. So it is when you access an external site. you can't truly just call out without setting up a remote site setting. So just think about it this way, that something like a Force.com platform will always check for those. Versus named credentials. Now, named credentials is kind of newer from what I recall, and it's actually the nice way of storing username and passcode for integrations somewhere neatly packaged away from code. So that's the way how I view it. I know it's in lame terms. It's not necessarily like read out based on documentation, but that's the way how I like to look at name credentials, and I'll pass it to the next person so they have something else to say.
Wow, Terry, good luck.
Yeah, I was hoping she was going to stop with the remote site settings, and then I would be next.
I should have. Sorry.
All good. For Apex callouts is where I think you would leverage name credentials, so that you're like was mentioned already, so we don't have to hard code username and passwords in our code. So that certainly makes maintenance simpler to use going forward. I was trying to think if there's really much else there that I'd want to add. Yeah, I don't really have much more there either.
Okay. Atul, I don't know if there's anything left for you to say on this.
Well, there's I think there's plenty left to say.
Okay.
On this.
All right, let's hear it.
Right. So it's remote site settings, right? So guys, again, the way remote site settings work is it's kind of a check that platform puts on things that on the URL or the endpoint, so to say, that you can call from Salesforce. So if you want to reach out to any endpoint, or you want to call any URL from Salesforce, you have to specify that URL in your remote site settings. If you don't do that, again, you might not be able to make the call out. So that's important. Named credentials, again, remote site settings is only about URL. There's nothing more to that. And just a check. It's a security. You can take it as a security check. Name credential, it kinds of goes one step forward. It takes the URL, the endpoint, as well as it, you can also specify the authentication parameters like the client ID, secret, password, those kind of things. So when you're using a name credential in Apex or in your code while doing a call out, you don't have to exactly hard code things, and you can just specify the name credential. But again, if you're using a name credential, you still have to specify the same URL as part of remote site settings, because again, remote site settings is a check that you have to kind of clear. So that's where these two things work, and they kind of complement each other.
I thought if you were using name credentials, you didn't need remote site settings.
No, I guess so. It is.
You don't. I think it's an either or. Name credentials defines the URL and then attaches the OAuth to it, so you don't need the remote sites.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So Jeff, Nicole, and Surabhi, you are on our next slide, which is remote site settings versus connected apps.
So I'll just add to that the first slide that somewhere I read that maybe it's easier to package remote site settings than name credentials. So if you're doing like a app exchange package, so remote site settings is easier for them.
Okay, and I actually read in one of the documents I read actually had the exact opposite, that named credentials, you basically package a named credential, but then everybody, once they install the package, they can set their own username and password that's specific to their org. But the code only has to access one named credential as long as it has the same name. So it's interesting that you found a completely different use case.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I read something similar as well, just not with name credentials and like app exchange packages, but using name credentials with different environments. So from sandbox to production, so you don't have to change the endpoint in your code, but you can change them for each environment as you're moving it through your different sandbox and production and whatnot.
Oh, maybe that's what I was reading. Okay, yeah, you're right, Nicole. I think that's what it was.
But maybe we should double check the app exchange thing.
Yeah. I think what it said was if you're managing multiple orgs, you can install the package in different orgs and then put your own username password in each org, as long as the named credential name stays the same. So yes, you're right, Nicole. I stand corrected.
Okay. I was
No,
like,
I'm not. I think it was Stack Exchange comment. I'll try to find the link again and post it, and maybe it's the other way. I'm not sure. I know in a lot of apps, like if we install a lot of apps, sometimes they ask us to create remote site settings, but maybe it was just because those apps have not been, updated or something after name credentials came in.
No, you're right. When you install most of your apps from the App Exchange, you have to create a remote site setting, but that is for your own instance. Like whenever you create a remote site setting for like something like field footprint or the declarative lookup summary tool, and you have to go in and add those, it's always for your own instance, not for a different URL. So it's like within your own platform. So I wonder if that has anything to do with it and why you wouldn't use a name credential in that use case.
Okay, yeah, I think that might be it because, yeah, that's true. We do add our own orgs.
Guys, yeah, I just wanted to correct you, and Jeff was absolutely right. If you have a name credential specified, you don't need to specify the same thing in the remote site settings. You can go ahead and skip it. And then, guys, again, I'm going on a little tangent here, but since we started talking about managed packages and everything, what do you think? How important? Like overall, it's not just integration and not just, but overall in terms of CTA. How important is packaging kind of comes into the picture, maybe from an ISV perspective or managed packages perspective. Is that also important? Because the same thing.
I'm hearing a lot of crickets here.
Yeah. I haven't seen very much in the material that focuses around managed packages or anything of that nature. And from my understanding, the majority of the mock review board scenarios that I've read are for a single instance, not for creating a partner application that you would have to disperse across multiple organizations.
Right, because now one of the reason why I'm asking this question, guys, because again our design choices and some of our answers are definitely going to be affected depending on if you're designing an application as a consult as a system integrator versus a managed package. The design is going to change. Our design choices and what we are using is going to change. And I don't know how that is going to affect the answers that we're going to choose as part of the question. So that's why. So
well, it'll be interesting to see as everybody takes your exams. Take a look at that and make note of that on your exam feedback and whether questions do come up about managed packages.
So on this one, I think more questions will come in the development, lifecycle, and deployment design exam. I think in that area, you'll get more questions on managed packages and deployment options you have.
Jeff, you took that exam, and I think a couple other folks have taken that one too. Who else has taken development lifecycle?
I did.
Okay. So do you remember any questions around managed packages on that exam?
It has been so long ago. I don't, to be quite honest. But
okay.
Well, maybe a fundamental question. There could have been a fundamental question of, hey, how do you deploy managed package? And you don't, right? You install it. So, but there might be some fundamental questions about moving the managed packages from point to point. Jeff, go ahead. I think I jumped in.
No, I was going to say the same thing. That's been a year and a half since I took it, so I don't remember a lot of the details.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is probably true, that there's something in there about how do you deploy a managed package, to make sure you understand it. But I don't remember there being a whole lot there.
Okay. All right. Getting back to topic at hand. And again, we have Jeff, Nicole, and Surabhi on this one. Remote site settings versus named credentials. Some people might confuse the two. What's the difference?
Oh, I think we're at the next one.
Oh, so sorry. Connected apps.
Yes.
What I meant was remote site settings and connected apps might confuse people.
So we've talked a lot about the remote site settings, which is typically defining outbound calls, whereas the connected apps is for defining things that are inbound. The ability to, not only the ability, but you add who can get to it, the different security parameters around either profiles, IPs, everything else, the type of, let's say, authorization that's going to happen. And that connected app also stores all of the, let's say, refresh tokens if you've made those available of people coming in. So that's also a place where you can go and revoke all those if you want people to have to log in again or to do so. You know, if you find there's a problem where people are getting in, you can go to the connected app to revoke the connections or getting in, see who is actually coming in the last time they came in. So it's basically, I think there's more differences here versus similarities because it's inbound versus outbound. A lot more things you can manage with the inbound. There's not a lot of stuff you can manage on the remote site settings outbound.
Okay. Nicole, anything to add to that?
No, he stole all my stuff. The only thing I had was like a straight line from the documentation was that connected apps use standard SAML and OAuth protocol, so you can use it with like single sign-on, and he mentioned the refresh tokens. So.
Okay, SAML and OAuth, probably good stuff to know for connected apps. Okay, Surabhi, anything else?
I had OAuth in my list, so.
Excellent. Very cool. Okay, so next up is going to be Waruna, and I guess I'm next, and then we're rotating back to Svatka again, and our topic is XML versus JSON. So Waruna, you're up first.
Sure. So I think JSON is like the new lightweight standard you can use. So it's kind of mainly key value pairs in the structure. And if you look at, for example, the REST API, it supports both JSON and XML. But if you take SOAP API, it's only XML standard is used.
Very cool. I guess what I will add to that is JSON, I think, is much more readable because you don't have all those HTML or XML elements inside there. It's a lot easier to read. You can put the same element more than once and it would overwrite the previous value. And I guess the other thing about JSON is strings are delineated from numbers, are delineated from Booleans by certain keywords or the absence or presence of quotes or lack of quotes. And then as Waruna said, JSON can be used for REST. XML can also be used for REST, but SOAP can only use XML. Svatka, anything else?
XML has to be parsed with XML parser, and JSON can be parsed by a standard JavaScript function. And it's good to be last because you say all the good stuff,
All right. Terry, Atul, and Jeff are next. And we're on SOAP versus REST. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to add for XML, that's the only one you can use with the metadata API as well.
Oh, very good point.
Then you could also include the metadata within the XML, so each item can have additional attributes, I guess is more what I'd want to say, where you can represent the attributes within JSON with objects and so forth, but it becomes more complex. So there's still a lot of attribute stuff with XML that is harder to do in JSON.
Okay. All right, over to Terry. Who did I say? Terry, Atul, and Jeff. SOAP versus REST. High level, guys. We're not going to spend an hour on this. Terry, you're first. After
Sorry, I was talking with to myself there for a moment.
And I'm sure it was very elegant words too.
Yeah, it was really fantastic stuff. I was sharing too. Actually, I'm going to cover the very basics, and then let the other two experts cover it, because I know they know more than I do on this. So, SOAP. One of the main things I understand with SOAP is that the WSDL aspect of that comes into play, where you will generate the WSDL that helps define the structure of the organization. And then with REST, one of the primary pieces there is that it's HTML in how you communicate with gets, posts, puts, that sort of thing. Those are kind of the two big items that come to my top of head, I guess, for me.
Do you mean HTTP?
HTTP. Sorry, what did
Okay.
I say? HTML, didn't I?
Yeah,
Yes,
HT something. I
Yes.
get all those acronyms mixed up.
Yes.
Okay, Atul, over to you. Tell us more about SOAP or REST.
Sure. So, so guys, again, first, the definitions or the abbreviations. So SOAP is nothing but simple object access protocol, and REST is a representational state transfer. Again, I'm not sure whether that question is going to come, but still good to know. And again, so SOAP is uses XML. REST uses you can use both. Again, REST as well as JSON. SOAP is more used in kind of enterprise level applications, and because enterprises, SOAP came first and REST came after that, or SOAP was became a little more mature before REST. Again, now REST is actually comparative, or actually much better than SOAP in a lot of ways. That's another thing. Then REST again, SOAP, you need WSDL files to be exchanged, right, from the endpoint, and it's a little heavier, it's a little more clunkier. REST is lightweight. You don't need any WSDL or anything like that to be exchanged. You just need to know the URL and the parameters that need to be passed in the right sequence of parameters that needs to be passed to communicate between two different systems. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. And Terry, what do you have to add to that? No, wait, not Terry.
Jeff.
Jeff, yes.
So a couple of things, REST is newer. A lot of people are pushing it. A couple of things that SOAP is still good for is if you need additional security, there's the WS security built into SOAP, which you can put higher levels of access. SOAP has built into it a retry logic, so that the communication fails, it can be set up to retry again, whereas REST is pretty much, if it fails, then you have to manage that retry yourself. There was one other thing I wanted to mention. Oh, transactional reliability. So if you're putting several of these things together, you can manage that a lot better under SOAP and the code that is processing of going through various steps versus just a post and get the answer back, or a get and get the answer back from the HTTP. So if you've got a lot of transactions, a lot of things you want to put together, and you want to have that all using transactional logic, SOAP is still kind of a better way to do that.
Why is that?
I think because of the way it's built into the actual code itself. Because it was kind of the way I guess it came about, and I'm trying to read through the notes that I have here. The way that it came about is the ability to perform multiple calls back and forth behind not just a single get an answer back, but it was set up to be an ongoing communication. So they kind of built transactional reliability into it. HTTP is more just web calls where you make a call, you get an answer back, you're done. There's not any transaction or any state associated with that. So it's more just, do it once and get an answer back.
Okay. That's cool. All right. So then Terry, you jumped to the bottom of the list somehow. And Svadka jumped to the bottom of the list too. I don't know how that happened. So we might get all mixed up on order now. But let's see, Nicole, Surabhi, and Svadka are next. And speaking of SOAP and WSDLs, let's talk about enterprise versus partner WSDLs.
Who do you want to go first?
Nicole.
Okay, I'm just going to do one of them because I don't think there's too much craziness here. I could be wrong, but I'm just going to start with the enterprise WSDL. And so this is going to be something that's strongly typed. It's specific to a single org. And if you update the configuration within the org, you will need to update you'll have to update your WSDL. And you primarily use this for customers. So this is for, a single customer that is, working primarily internally.
Okay. Surabhi.
So I'll just add one small point to SOAP versus REST, that REST is mobile friendly. So from a use case perspective, if in the use case they ever mention mobile, we can just use REST.
That's right. Yeah, and I'm sorry, guys. I should be asking the rest of the group if there's anything else to add. So if I forget to do that and jump to the next slide, and you had something to say on the previous slide, please, by all means, remind me, just jump in, interrupt me, say, hey, we're not done here yet. So thank you, Surabhi. But now tell us about enterprise versus partner WSDL.
So with partner WSDL, we don't have the hard configuration of the custom fields. It always goes and fetches the custom fields. And I'm sorry, I'm forgetting this. How do I say it? But it's like the describe object. So all the custom fields are always fetched in real time. So we don't really have to worry about if we change the object or add a new custom field. We don't really have to worry about updating the WSDL if we are using a partner WSDL.
Okay.
So it gives us more flexibility on usage or scalability in future if we have to add or update anything in our org.
All right. Svatka, anything else to add?
I don't know if Surabhi just mentioned it or not, but partner WSDL is typically used when you're working with more than one org, and I think you may have said that. Enterprise WSDL is strongly typed, partner WSDL is loosely typed, and I think that majority of my customers do prefer partner WSDL, but it's harder to use, right? Versus enterprise WSDL, then you can actually see the field, so it's a lot easier to work with the enterprise versus the partner in a sense that you can see the sort of definitions in enterprise versus partner.
Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
So I'm going to throw this one out to the group. So can anybody give me kind of a high-level step-by-step process of making a call using an enterprise WSDL versus using a call versus a partner WSDL? What would the differences be and how many steps you'd have to take to make, to Svatka's point, that using the partner WSDL is a little more complicated? Which I totally agree with, by the way. I'm thinking like Jeff or Atul would be good candidates to answer that one. Not to put you guys on the spot or anything.
Nope. I have used enterprise WSDL, in a couple of scenarios, but never got to get my hands on partner WSDL, so to say. So to give you an idea exactly, so even for the enterprise WSDL guys, so again, usually I've been on the other side of the SOAP integration where we are doing integration with some other system, maybe some .NET or Java system, and that other team kind of gives us the WSDL. We kind of upload it into Salesforce as a Apex class. Again, endpoints and everything is part of that class, and we go ahead and just use whatever the methods that are there in the class. Yes, and that's an interesting point. I should actually be looking into that. Yes, because again,
Yes, one of the things you'll have to do is with the enterprise WSDL, when you pull back an object, you'll know right away that you pulled the account, and you can define it as account as soon as you get it back, and then you can start referencing the fields within that directly off of methods that are associated to your account, because that was all part of the object that came in when you did the enterprise WSDL Apex. When you pull something out of the partner, what you're going to get back is an S object. So you're going to have to make a call back to the API to find out what type of S object it is. You'll get that. Then you'll have to make a call back to say, now that my S object, I know that I'm account, what fields are available in the account, and you'll get back a list of fields that you'll have to keep track of. And then you can step through each of those and say, start grabbing the piece of information that you want out of it. So you directly know what you've got and can start accessing the data with the enterprise. With the partner, you've got to go through steps to get the next level. What type of object? Now give you the fields, and then get the data out of that. I don't know if there's if anybody's worked with the partner directly doing that.
Got it. So it means that using partner WSDL is a lot more work on the other side.
It's a lot more work on the side, right? That's getting it, but
Right.
It's easier from the standpoint of, again, when a new field is added, you've got to go get a new enterprise WSDL if you want that new field.
Right.
You don't have to do anything on the partner, because all you do is ask for the set of fields, and that will give you back that new field right away. So it's easier if your data is changing a lot, but it's harder to step through what you're getting back and actually process it.
All right. Now here, guys, I've got a question here. What is more preferable, using this enterprise or partner wizard, or just doing a REST API call to the Salesforce org? Again, in terms of if some other system is trying to consume or send data over to Salesforce.
I guess it would depend on the capabilities of the system and what you're trying to do.
But again, is there anything that I can accomplish with the enterprise and partner wizard that I cannot do by just doing a REST API call to a Salesforce org?
It's a good question. I was under the impression that the SOAP and the REST APIs both have very similar kind of capabilities on what you're allowed to do. Can you delete with the SOAP API? I know you can delete with REST.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. You should have to, because in a data loader, right? Data loader is a SOAP. You can tell the delete functions.
Okay.
I'm thinking one of the bigger things may be the size of what you can get back. I think with REST, because you're getting an HTTP response back, there's a certain size limit on how big a response that can be. Versus SOAP, where you're getting raw XML, I think that can just stream back and you can actually get more information. If I remember right, like if you're doing a very large call or getting a lot of information back. But then I guess you can also just do the paging. So maybe that's not applicable.
Got it.
We're just creating more questions to answer. That's good discussion.
That's not a good thing the night before the test. We're getting answers, not questions.
But I'm getting you prepped to think for the exam. Like, what kind of things should I be considering? Because it's always, there's so many questions that hinge on one little word in the scenario, and if you don't catch that word, you're going to pick the wrong answer. So look for that key word. Are they going to say large volume? Are they going to say enterprise scale versus partner or something? So, okay, so who did we have on? I think it was Nicole Surubi and Svadka on that last one. Is that right? So then we're on to Terry, Waruna, and me. And we're talking about data loading versus SOAP versus the bulk API. So Terry, you get to go first.
All right. Bulk API is obviously intended for larger volumes. I believe that runs in parallel, which is what I think on our next slide, or it can, which certainly makes it significantly quicker to get those larger data loads in place. I'm not going to have a whole lot of insight on the SOAP API for data loading right now.
Okay. Well, the one thing I'll add on the SOAP API is it's better for real-time updates. So if something has to happen like right away as a result of a data change, SOAP would be a good way to do that. But also to your point, it's for much smaller data volumes, 200 records or less maybe. If you're doing more than that, SOAP API is just going to be way too slow, in part because you're using XML, which is just a lot of overhead to send a little bit of data, and in part just because the limits are smaller with SOAP API. SOAP API typically synchronous. Bulk API, the initial request is synchronous, but the actual processing happens asynchronously. And Waruna, what do you have to add? Take your mute off, Waruna, and then tell us, because you're probably saying some awesome stuff, but we can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So bulk API, it supports CSV files, JSON, and XML, compared to SOAP, which is only XML. And bulk API has, I think we talked that there are two versions. The new version has higher limits. So I think you have to use bulk API if you're using high volumes, or if you're doing parallel processing, then bulk API is the way to go.
Okay. Anything else from anybody before we move on to bulk
Guys,
API, different modes?
I don't have anything to add, but I've got a couple of questions. So, Natalya, you said SOAP API is good for smaller sets of data, but isn't data loader based on SOAP API?
I'm not sure. Somebody did say that. I think, well, you'll notice data loader does 200 records at a time.
Got it. So it's the batch size, but
right.
Okay, got it. So you are referring to the batch size, not the overall thing, right? Overall, again, a data loader can go up to 50 million.
Right. I don't remember the exact limits for data loader. Speaking of limits, yeah, well, that'd probably be another good one to know is how many can data loader process versus the bulk API.
Bulk API can go into hundreds and millions.
Right.
That's for sure. Okay, so that's one. And then I think Varuna said something around that SOAP API can only take care of XML. But data loader does consume CSV. So what you're saying is internally it takes care of XML.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, it must be working some magic behind the scenes to convert it to XML.
Yeah, so data loader supports up to 5 million records.
Okay. There you go.
Was it 5 million or 50 million?
I think it's 5.
Okay.
The only other thing I was going to ask or add is that when I was studying for data architecture, they mentioned that the bulk API is what they normally suggest for your first initial backup. When you're doing a full backup of your organization, you generally want to do that with a bulk API. So I guess it's a little different because you're doing like an export, but I put it in here because I use data loader for exporting too.
Oh, okay. And isn't there a way in data loader to enable bulk API, or is it just to enable parallel processing? There's some sort of option that you go.
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Yep, and you can do it in other third-party data loaders as well, like Jitterbit.
Okay.
Which is actually interesting because it switches from SOAP, which is doing for the initial set, then over to REST when it goes to bulk.
Even though the initial call to the, wasn't there something about when I was studying the bulk API that the initial call to the bulk API is made via SOAP to establish the session because you can't authenticate with REST, but then you send the session ID via REST calls with the data.
Yes, and that's in the Trailhead too. You have to set up when you do the SOAP API integration, and you use the add-on that they have you install. You have to initiate your session with the SOAP API, and then you can run your the REST API. Yeah.
Yeah. So
or use REST. Gosh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Here we go.
We heard what you meant.
Here, Natalya, one last thing. What do you mean by you cannot authenticate with REST API and you can only do that with SOAP?
Well, in the bulk API instructions, what it said was to create the session ID. Yeah, see, as I was saying it didn't make sense because you could send authentication through in the REST header. But the documentation I read said even though bulk API uses REST, you need to establish the session via SOAP first.
Got it. So it's a limitation on the bulk API. Got it. Makes sense.
I guess so.
I'll find that Trailhead because I just did it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool.
All right, so then let's see. We're on Atul, Jeff, and Nicole talking about bulk API in serial mode versus parallel mode. Atul, and then Jeff, and then Nicole.
Sure, guys. So again, pretty straightforward. So bulk API supports, again, there's one thing, guys, there's bulk API 1.0 and 2.0. 2.0 is pretty new, and definitely there's a lot of difference. I'm gonna skew over to any question that's gonna come in on bulk API, and if it's not specifically mentioned 2.0, then just consider it's 1.0, right? So again, that's my personal preference, my personal choice. If anybody has seen otherwise, or the questions have been a little confusing, you can kind of let us know. So bulk API, bulk API 1.0 does support serial mode and parallel mode. 2.0 doesn't support parallel mode right now. So yeah, it doesn't make sense talking about bulk API 2.0 in terms of parallel mode. Serial mode, again, that's the main thing. It's gonna upload data serially. And you can choose, you can flip between these two. You can either choose the serial mode or you can flip and you choose the parallel mode. Parallel mode, you can upload multiple you can upload data in parallel. But yeah, there are issues like data locking or apex locking. Those kind of concurrent transactions can lock in terms of parallel mode. So you have to be a little careful around how you're uploading the data and what kind of data you're uploading in parallel mode. Otherwise, it's not a problem. Yeah.
I do need to correct one thing you said. You said 2.0 does not support parallel mode, but at least in the Winter 18 release, it does say that parallel is the default value for Bulk API 2.0. So it does support parallel or serial.
I hope they cover it, or there's not much reason to use it, because that's your main advantage, other than the pure number of records, is the parallel, so they could run so much faster. So without it, there's not really a lot of need for it. So
right. And I know there are still some limitations on Bulk API 2.0. And I know on the data architecture exam, they specifically pulled out the differences between Bulk API 2.0 and 1.0, but they don't necessarily say that on this exam. So hopefully the questions will be more generic on this one. Okay. And who did I say was going next? Jeff.
That was me. Yeah. So I mean, I think the reason you would do the parallel rather than the serial, both of them would get your data in, but with the parallel, because you're running up to 5 loads at the same time, you can get that large set of records much quicker, as long as you've got it ordered in the correct way to try and minimize record locking. And then I guess that was back to the. Now, I was going to say some of the reasons that you do to prevent data locking, that probably doesn't apply here with serial versus parallel. That's all I have.
Okay, Nicole?
Yeah, so I was actually going to add, this was the topic that I think I did last or 2 times ago. So you would use the, so again, bulk API serial mode if you're doing large user updates. So pretty much like anything that surrounds users and record ownership. So I would think that if you're doing anything with like thousands upon thousands of users, if you're restructuring enterprise territory management, or if you're restructuring your roles or your groups or anything like that, I would assume you would need to use the serial mode there. And then the only other cool thing I found is that the bulk API can process up to 20 million records per hour.
Wow, that's a lot of records.
Sweet. Yeah. So
that'd be in parallel, right?
Yes, parallel mode. Yep.
Wow. Okay.
It's a lot.
I would
Anything
say, wow.
else on this?
Yeah, I would say, wow, in 2008, I was loading 1.2 million rows. We didn't have bulk API. It took us 13 hours.
Oof.
So it was painful. So, wow, yes.
Yikes. Okay, so we are on to Surabhi, Svatka, and Terry, and we're talking about mashups versus Canvas. Surabhi, you can lead us off.
Okay, so mashups would be anything like Google Maps if we integrate in any of our Visualforce pages. So that kind of acts as a mashup. And Canvas apps are basically if we are integrating an iframe inside of Salesforce and connecting maybe like a Tableau or something inside of Salesforce, then that would act as a canvas. And on Canvas, I think the advantages is that we can like kind of see login history and stuff. And I'm not sure if we can look that up in mashups.
Okay. Svatka?
Mashups, I guess why using mashups? They provide immediate benefit at little cost. When we look at Canvas the applications can be written in any language. And one thing I remember from last time whoever presented was that you can easily interact with the application within Canvas. Whereas mashups, I don't think you would be able to navigate between records. So the natural flow of sort of navigating between the rows in a Canvas and your Salesforce applications are not as easy with mashup as it is with Canvas. So that's what I remember about the last session that someone presented.
Okay. Terry, anything else?
Yeah, that was Jeff, our expert on Canvas.
There you go.
Our expert on all of this stuff, probably. Mashups require very little development effort, so there is development involved, but you're typically leveraging technology that's already pre-built, and you're just displaying that within Salesforce. We've already mentioned things like Google Maps. There's a variety of different. I kind of think of it more of as a gadget. It's something that's fairly simple that you're just wanting to be able to add some value add to Salesforce. Where Canvas is really much. I think of Canvas more as an app that is that's much more involved in capability. It's probably, I don't know if I want to say this or not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Canvas is more a play if it's an application that's already within your enterprise and you're trying to leverage that within Salesforce. Where Mashup is probably something that was created outside and you're pulling that in, again, just kind of as a little gadget or widget to add into Salesforce.
So does anybody know, because both Mashups and Canvas are pulling in information from other sites, do we need to add whatever we're including in a Mashup or a Canvas in like a remote site or a named credential to make it work? I don't know the answer to that.
Mashups, I don't believe. Canvas has the security built into it. I'm trying to remember how it does it, but
yeah, there was something about like IP whitelisting and something about cores, and that was another one of those sample exam questions on the study guide.
Right. There's with Canvas, because it's going back and forth, you definitely have to have the user defined. There's an auth piece to it. I'll look back through the notes from a couple weeks ago to look at it. Because it is more interactive. There's events. That's kind of the big piece. Terry indicated it well, but that's probably the biggest thing that you get with the Canvas is it's events that are going on, clicking, selecting things. It notifies the Canvas app. The Canvas app can act on it, store data, grab more data. It's more interactive versus just grabbing the data and displaying something but being done.
I think there is a connected user that we need to create, and you're right, and I'm forgetting right now, but there would be like a user that we create, and that user we define. I think it's in the connected apps that we add and set up.
Okay. Yeah, the one thing that was really, again, this was one of the mock exams on the study guide, is it talked about CORS, which is cross-object remote site or something like that. I probably have the acronym wrong. But it basically says, if you're on the salesforce.com site, but you're calling, let's say, google.com from the same script, some browsers might prevent that from happening, thinking, you're trying to do like a browser injection or something. And so you have to set some security settings to allow that to happen. Otherwise, your application's not going to work.
Right. That's like with the Mashup. If it's doing that with Canvas, it's actually built into the JavaScript library that allows you, the way it's done, that it's not going to trigger that you're doing the cross org. It's not going to identify that, although you're calling something within that other, outside your organization, the JavaScript protects that and allows it to happen. So it allows that communication to go back and forth.
Okay. Yeah, and also IP whitelisting is the other thing that was mentioned in the mock exam that helps with that security. All right, so who were we on? I've completely lost track of where we are with who's presenting next.
And last thing I'll add on Mashup and Canvas is that it's more like a process integration and not a data integration. So if there's a use case saying that when should we be using this, like if we don't want to store any data that's coming or it's more like a process piece. So then we can consider Mashup or Canvas as a solution.
Good point. Very good point.
Yeah. So part of the definition of the Canvas, you have to define either an OAuth 2.0 or you have a special thing called a signed request, which is what then is the communication back and forth. Signed request is more like you're not using a certificate here, but it's a way to say, yes, I know who this user is without actually having to store their ID and password. So it is built into when you're defining the Canvas app.
Okay. So a little more security around Canvas required?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Mashups versus Canvas? Okay, so who were the last three that spoke? Because I've completely lost track now. So I'm just going to say Nicole and Svatka and Terry are next because I have no idea who's next. Or I'll do Nicole, me, and Terry. If I just called on you, I'm sorry, but this list keeps flipping around on me that I'm using to call on people. So hopefully I'm kind of going in my mind, okay, who hasn't spoken in a while? So I'll go first on streaming API versus chatter API. So they're similar in the fact that they both kind of deal with, you get notices, like chatter has this concept of a feed of what's going on. But streaming API is really more about notifying other systems or other applications of what's happening. And you could use it to notify systems outside of your org, I believe. And if I'm wrong, somebody please correct me. Chatter API is great for if you're building like a voting app or like a reviewing website. Chatter API would be great for that. If, on the other hand, a system wanted to know about a change in your database, it would use the streaming API to subscribe and basically ask for requests. Nicole, I'll pass it off to you.
Cool, you did most of it. So yeah, so I kind of had the same thing, and that you would have users, you can have users subscribe to like a certain channel so that they get notifications of certain data changes as well with the streaming API if you wanted to. And I had a note that like streaming API is near real-time updates for when those changes are made to the database. And then I had the chatter API is really nice for any mobile application that you're building for your particular org. And I also noted that the chatter API can also access files, recommendations, topics, and those kind of things as well, if that was something that you wanted to include. So, knowledgeable people on certain topics within chatter, you can access all of that through the chatter API.
Awesome. Terry?
Yeah, I would add that your chatter API can communicate with JSON and XML, and your streaming is JSON only. JSON is asynchronous. I'm sorry. let me say the streaming is asynchronous, where chatter is a synchronous process. And streaming also has that unusual protocol. Is it BayUX or?
Yeah, Bayou and Comet D. Remember those words because that'll probably come up on the exam.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Anything on streaming versus chatter?
One interesting note that I found in the stuff, it says if you've got a SOAP or a REST API right now that does polling to see if anything's changed, that you should consider redoing that with streaming for much better performance and lower resource consumption. So instead of having something that runs every 5 minutes to say, did it change, did it change? Just switch over to streaming where you're notified when it changes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think people were writing applications like that. They used to call it a heartbeat, where they would literally go in and check in to see, hey, has anything changed? And I think that's why Salesforce sort of answered that call with streaming API. So I would echo that.
Okay. Anything else? Streaming versus chatter? Okay, then we have Waruna and Surabhi and a tool for streaming API versus notifying a system by call out when a change happens. Why would you use one over the other? And Waruna, we'll start with you.
Okay, so for streaming API, we use that mainly to get like near real-time streaming data. So, so outside party, they don't need to do pull and look at the data. They can subscribe for that streaming information, and they can get whenever there are changes that you would track as part of streaming API. So notification via call out, or let someone else speak on that.
Nicole, I think you just got the hot potato passed to you.
Sorry, am I on notification call out as well? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is one that I really don't know, I think, enough about. So I have like notes on a bunch of these, and this is one where I just don't have it.
Okay, and this might be one I added like today as I was thinking about it. And what I mean by notification via callout is when would you implement a streaming API versus when something changes, you make like a SOAP callout or a REST callout to another system to let them know something changed.
Is that like your workflow callout? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, or outbound message, or maybe
messaging,
hitting a REST endpoint or hitting a SOAP endpoint. When would you implement streaming API versus kind of a as it happens call out to a system instead?
So streaming, basically, you don't care who's listening. You're basically saying something changed, and whoever wants to listen has connected to it, and they say they can. With a notification via callout, let's say if you wanted to contact 4 different systems, 5 different systems, you'd have to do a separate callout to each one of those. So the streaming kind of comes in as I'm going to notify everybody when something changes. You guys decide whether you want to know about that change versus me having to know about all the different changes and make a specific call out. So that's probably the biggest thing is I changed the account. If anybody cares, you guys have hooked to it and you know that I changed.
And if you don't care, it's not my problem to care that you don't care.
Right, exactly. Okay. I'm not going to put something to make you care if you don't care. So probably the streaming comes in much more if you want to notify multiple systems. It becomes much easier to do it that way of just send a message out and let them connect and know that it changed.
Okay.
So Jeff, is it more like for an ESB or something? Like, is that what you mean? Like, if you have...
No, exactly. Yeah, so let me add a little bit on that. So streaming API uses some kind of, a similar framework where you've got like a subscriber or client. So streaming API just, like rightly said, it's just going to put it out there. And, whoever wants to subscribe to the notifications that are coming out or the data that is streaming API is putting out there, you can just subscribe to that and then, and listen to it. So there are multiple systems. So I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, streaming API is not going to exactly go ahead and hit every system. It's just going to put it out there as part of an endpoint, and you can just subscribe to that endpoint, and you'll start receiving the notifications or whatever the changes that are coming from the streaming API. Again, with the notification, yes, you have to send it across all the way specifically to the other system if you want to send out that notification. It's not exactly kind of a subscriber model there.
Now the contrary to that is if you made a change to an account and you want to know that the other system got that and processed it, that's where you go back to the notification. Because the streaming basically says I made a change, you guys decide.
There's no feedback. Yes.
Right. I don't care whether you got it or not. The notification, if you want to care, if your ordering system, you want to say, hey, I updated the account and I want to make sure that you got that and processed it, then you do more of the notification call out, because then you can wait for the response coming back. So it's kind of the model of what you want to do. You could still do it with streaming, where you could make the message, let the other system receive that, and then notify you back that they made the change. But that's extra work. So there's ways to do it both ways. It just kind of depends on how you want to set it up. All these things have more than one solution.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I remember that from the TDX boot camp, where the phrase that came up over and over again was "it depends." It's like,
yes.
It depends on what you're trying to do. So yeah, I guess we could say this one comes down to who cares more. Is it the subscribing system that cares more, or is it the publishing system that cares more? And that might decide which way you're going to go on this. Okay, so who hasn't spoken in a while? Svatka, I don't think we've put you in the hot seat in a while. And Terry's been kind of quiet, and Waruna, we'll go to you three.
I'm laughing.
Metadata versus tooling API. And Terry, I think you initially posted this question early on in the study group.
This is one you just added. This wasn't here earlier.
Oh, wasn't it? Oh, I must have been going back. Oh, that's because I was going back through the Slack channel and I saw the question. I said, oh, let's put this in.
So metadata API is used for deployments. And so I really enjoy it because I use it when I use int quite a lot. So you'll be able to retrieve and then deploy any changes to your build in a Salesforce org that is exposed via an API, right? So the exposed via an API is really the main key. Not everything that we build in Salesforce can be deployed via int because it might not be in the metadata API. So I do appreciate metadata API quite a lot because I use it all the time. And I'll let Terry pick on the second one. I'm sorry, I'm giving you the hard one. I'm really sorry, man.
I was just going to pass and say I have I think it was Jeff who mentioned when I asked that question early on that I think that was it the tooling one that is used by outside systems trying to communicate or talk with Salesforce. Was that kind of the difference? It was something like that. I honestly I don't know the answer to this one.
Yeah, I'm going back to look because I remember we talked about it earlier, and I don't remember what we talked about.
Yeah, one of the things I remember about tooling API is like when you run a test in Developer Console, it's using the tooling API to run those tests.
Yeah, I had a note in mind that you can use the tooling API to integrate Salesforce metadata with other systems. Not necessarily like migrating it from Salesforce to Salesforce org, but integrating it with another system.
So guys, here, the basic difference that kind of comes out of documentation is, so if you want to deploy something, use metadata API. Tooling API, they again, metadata API is much more complete in terms of what kind of metadata components are exposed and what you can deploy. Again, there are a lot of things that are still missing in tooling API. That's one. And then there's a contrast, like there's a lot of things that are available in tooling API but not in metadata. So tooling API was more around Salesforce kind of created more around providing people more tools. So as the name says, creating more tools around working with code or working with creating kind of IDEs around Salesforce. So for example, our Eclipse works on metadata API right now. If again, it does have certain limitations to it. Now if you Salesforce kind of went ahead and re-engineered the whole thing and came out with tooling API that's more engineered towards coding and providing the tools for creating code and tools for kind of going ahead and tinkering with the Salesforce system. So that's where tooling API kind of comes into the picture.
I also had a note that you can use the tooling API to build custom development tools.
Yes.
So yeah, okay.
Yeah, it looks like it's for like doing debugging, code coverage, autocomplete, things like that. Like you say, more things towards like an IDE or a tool versus actually interacting with.
Right. Tooling API is not exactly suited. It's not exactly preferred to do metadata deployment, so to say, because again, the first thing is there are a lot of components that are missing in tooling API. Again, I'm not sure whether they are going to come up with adding more and more components to tooling API, and it's said, again, I've heard it a couple of places that they're going to eventually get rid of metadata API, but I'm not sure whether that's going to happen or these two APIs are going to exist side by side.
I can't imagine them getting rid of either one of them because they've got so much stuff that's tied into it. And if they say they're always going to be backwards compatible, I don't know how they can get rid of anything. All right. Let's see what's next. One-way TLS versus two-way TLS. And Surabhi, we haven't heard from you in a while. And then we're going to have Varuna, and then I will take third stab at this one. So Surabhi, you're up.
And I'm trying to remember, this was the certificate piece, and I know we had a discussion on it. So
tell us what you remember about certificates in general.
Okay, so we have the SSL certificate, so that, if it's a third party, we need like a verification from, there can be three types of certificate. One can be the self-signed certificate that we create. Then there is the CA authority signed certificate that can be created. and there's one more, and I'm forgetting the last one.
I can't help you out because I don't know.
No, on this one, yeah, and basically it's basically like if I want to do like a security connection or secure connection, then I would upload a Salesforce or maybe an external certificate inside of Salesforce. And the two-way certificate was, I think we have to also upload the Salesforce certificate on an external, like the server we are talking to, saying that this is the server, like doing basically the handshake that is needed. And I know Jeff had explained this in a lot of details.
Okay, Varuna, what do you want to add to this?
Well, I think all the things that I want to talk, she covered, but I'm not very familiar with this area, so I have to skip this one. Sorry about that.
Okay, there was, and I don't remember if it was on this one-way versus two-way TLS, but there was some sort of integration catch where it said Salesforce will only accept certificates from a like a trusted certificate authority, where it will not accept self-signed certificates. Does anybody remember what that situation was where that was the case?
Right. So there are two types of certificates, guys. So one is the signed and the unsigned certification. So signed is what you need to go forward and get it signed from a third party, right? So there are certain organizations who kind of certify a certificate. So it's certify a certificate. Yeah, I said that, and that's how it works. So basically, if we come around to one-way and two-way TLS, it's so two-way, simply two-way, both the parties. So there's a client and there's a server. Both the parties, they exchange certificates, and both the parties kind of verifies each other's certificates. One way is just one party, kind of gives out the certificate to the other party, and that's the only verification that is done. Simple as that. That's the way.
Okay. And does anybody remember where Salesforce does not accept self-signed certificates, where it has to be a signed certificate, like from a certificate authority?
Yeah, I'm looking for that because I know there's a very specific example.
Again, doesn't it depend on the two systems that are talking to each other, where if they require the signed certificate or not? Yeah.
I remember now. So it's Natalya, it's like if I'm going to be acting as the identity provider.
Ah, okay.
That's true.
So,
yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. If you're the identity provider, because then you are kind of acting as.
Right. You can't verify who you are yourself for doing identity. You have to have somebody else say who you are in order to do identity.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, that was it. All right. Anything else on one-way versus two-way?
Just to kind of encapsulate, totally. So the one-way that you always get when you do HTTPS is the server says who they are, so you know that you've connected to the right server. That second part says, now that I know I've got the right server, I'm going to make sure the server knows who I am, so that both of us have said, I know who you are based on your certificate, you know who I am. Now we can encrypt the connection between us, so even though we may be on doing things differently, we've got that pipe essentially connected where both of us have the key going back and forth to add additional security. So it's verifying both the server and the client.
So in that case, because I mean the whole point of HTTPS, if I remember right, is the server sends its public key, and you encrypt the data with the server's public key, and then it decrypts it with its private key. But when you have two-way TLS, whose certificate are they using for the encryption?
So each way encrypts their own, and then it gets decrypted on the other side. So if I'm sending a message, then I encrypt it with my certificate, and they decrypt it with theirs. So when you got the two-way, if you're doing the one, I'm trying to think how this works, because we've said who the server is. We've got I think it's less about the signing of it, and it's more about verifying who you're talking to.
Okay.
So when you go to the bank, you want to make sure that you actually reach the bank.
Yeah, you want to make sure it's the right bank too.
Now, the bank cannot set up a certificate for every single person So they end up having a two-factor where they'll either send something to your phone, send something to your email, so that you can go back and validate who you are. But the two-way is like when two servers are going to talk to each other. I know I've reached the bank and it's the right bank, and the bank knows that I'm supposed to be talking to them because they've passed it as well. So it's really a server-to-server thing where both sides validate that they've got the right person that they should be communicating, then they start communicating.
Okay.
So in effect, it's the two-factor like you do when you connect to your bank, but it's the two-factor in terms of the servers aren't going to change. So we'll upfront define that they both should be talking, then they just can continue to do it by exchanging the certificates.
Okay. Cool. All right, Nicole, Terry, and Svatka, you guys are next. And you get request and reply integration versus fire and forget integration. Nicole, you get to go first.
Okay, cool. All right. So the best way that I can think of this is that like your request and reply is it's usually something that is invoked by the user. So it's something that you want to happen pretty quickly, but the user is waiting for a response back. Whereas fire and forget, it's something that can be sent off, and the user doesn't have to sit around and wait for that response to come back. So it's something that you can use where they don't need an immediate response, or they don't need to know that it was handed off to the other system.
Okay. Terry, what do you want to add to that?
Yes, one of the things that I always thought was kind of odd with both of these, because even on fire and forget, there is still an acknowledgement of receipt from the party that you're sending it to. So it's not like there isn't a sort of a reply. It is acknowledging that it succeeded in getting to its target. I think of the fire and forget as your typical outbound message being kicked off via workflow. That's a good example of where fire and forget is handled. Salesforce is managing all of that retries for you. So if it doesn't receive the acknowledgement, Salesforce will continue to try for up to 24 hours. And at that point, then it drops trying to continue to send that notification. That's off the top of my head, that's where I'm at right now.
Okay. And then who did I say? Svatka, I think we had you on this one too.
The way how I look at both is, and it really depends on a use case to make the right call. And sometimes it means going to the business and asking, how sure are you that you need the information right away versus it can wait, right? And so that would be one way of deciding which one of those two to use. Additionally, also the trigger mechanism. If I have an agent hitting a button, most likely they will want to see a response on a screen. That means I would probably pick a request and reply because I'm looking for that information. But if I maybe submit an order and it just has to make it downstream, and I don't care about the order number from the downstream system, then maybe fire and forget is the right approach.
Yeah. One thing for me is fire and forget, I think, is a bit of a misnomer because you're really not forgetting. At some point, there's going to be a callback that says, hey, I processed your request and here's the information. So that's what always gets me about this pattern is like, you're really not forgetting. Because if you were truly firing and not caring about it, why are you sending the message off in the first place? Even with outbound messaging, it says, yeah, send the outbound message and that's asynchronous, but at some point that system's probably going to make a callback back into you and tell you what it's done.
Right.
So that's just my little rant there. So I'm over it now. So,
probably the one true fire and forget is the streaming API.
Oh, that's true.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah, that is very true. It's like, okay, send it out there and I don't care if anybody's listening or not. So somebody said they wanted the information. Here's the information. Do whatever you want to do with it. So, okay. All right. So then we're on to Jeff, Atul, and Surabhi for the next topic. And we got hub and spoke integration architecture versus enterprise service bus. Jeff, you get to go first.
Yes, we could probably talk for a while on this. Let me see the best way to do it. So the hub and spoke is basically where you call an intermediate source, and then that intermediate source calls out to other different systems that need to know about that message. So you're basically calling into one, kind of like a bicycle, and then that hub is basically sending out the call or the messages out to various other systems. This is kind of a way that a lot of stuff used to be done. In terms of the ESB makes it, you don't have to have everything hooking into one centralized system. The ESB kind of sets up a pipeline now that we're more global, that says we're going to be able to process the various messages, the various calls at different locations. So depending on, if I'm over in Europe, I don't want to always have to make a call back to the US in order to fulfill this. I'm going to make the call just locally, and the ability to solve that is in multiple different sites. So all I have to do is get the call into essentially the service bus, and the closest thing that can respond to that will grab it and process it. So it makes it more scalable. It makes it more distributed, but it also becomes much more difficult to manage when you have a change. That change has to get out to the different place, to the different, especially the ESB servers that can do it. Hub and spoke is much more direct, where I just notify to, I think we're covering point to point next. Point to point is the most direct, where I'm sending a message to a particular system. The hub kind of centralizes the collection of that and distributes out how it's going to be processed. Let me see if I've got any more specific notes. That's what I have right now.
Okay. So Tool, what do you want to add to that?
Right. So hub and spoke versus ESB, we're talking about that, right?
Yes.
Right. So hub and spoke is just like that. So you've got a hub, and you've got so that hub kind of, so let's say you've got Salesforce as the hub, then multiple systems are going to come down to Salesforce, and they're going to directly talk to Salesforce to either send the data, receive the data. Usually it's in terms of receiving the data. Again, you can do both ways. So it's just one place, and that one system talking to all the other systems individually. ESB is the enterprise service bus. Again, it's kind of a middle system. Again, we cannot call Salesforce as a ESB. It's kind of a middle system that can talk to multiple systems both ways, and it can do a lot of so all the systems don't need to follow the same language, or to the same you can say the same language to talk to ESB. ESB can handle multiple ways of talking to these systems, and then it just goes ahead and translates maybe do a little bit of data transformation as well. And there's a little bit of logic that you can also put into an ESB, and then the two systems via ESB can talk to each other. And exactly, so you can actually receive data from one system and distribute it out to multiple systems using ESB. But hub and spoke is like a one-to-one thing. Yeah, that's what I have.
Surabhi, what do you want to add?
So I am not sure about this entirely, but maybe I think hub and spoke kind of supports all the formats, because maybe it does talking to multiple systems. And with ESB, I think we have to have the same standard of, like with hub and spoke, if they're talking to multiple systems, it will be able to do XML, JSON, and SOAP. And I think in ESB, because it's just the same system that's kind of talking across, like the pipeline that he mentioned. So maybe it has to be in the SOAP format, but I'm not very sure about this.
There was a great link. I posted it. It's on the resources tab, the third tab in the resources Google sheet. It had a really good explanation. And kind of the key points probably important for the exam for me is in hub and spoke, you basically have one middleman that handles everything, which could make it a bottleneck if you're trying to process a lot of data through, because everything has to go through that middle point. And it's usually proprietary and therefore hard to scale. Enterprise service bus, you basically have a bunch of systems hooked to the bus. Each system has its own adapter. So it basically takes its data, transforms it into the format so it can flow across the bus. And then some other system that wants to grabs that data, then translates it back into its own language or format and does something with it. ESB is more kind of like Legos, where you can put multiple pieces together, where let's say I want to send this data to an authenticating authority, and then I want to send it to an ETL tool, and then finally I'm going to send it to my endpoint. And I can pick and choose what parts of the bus I want to talk to. Whereas with hub and spoke, you have one central controller that's doing all that work for you, whether you want it or not, and you're paying for all that overhead, whether you need all that overhead or not. Anybody else want to add anything to that or correct anything I've said? Because I very well could have explained it wrong.
Just a question.
Go ahead.
When you talk about like an ETL tool, how does that play in with this topic? Is that a traditional just hub and spoke type technology, or can that also be ESB, or is that entirely different?
The way I was reading it is it could be a component on the ESB, and you decide whether you need to talk to that component or not.
Okay.
So if you think of just data, like an Informatica is a hub and spoke, where the tool itself, you kind of go to it and then out to various other different systems. But they're also migrating too now. If you look at MuleSoft, anyone who's looked at that, they not only have an ETL tool that allows you to move data, but they've started to include the ability to set up more servers to do the processing in different places. So although it where it started out as a hub and spoke is now taken that hub and put it in multiple places, which is really what ends up being the ESB. Is you're no longer confined to one hub. That hub can be in multiple places in order to distribute the work. So
yeah, and actually I think the links I posted were from a MuleSoft site, now that you mention it. I'm actually looking it up now. Where was it? Yeah, it was on the MuleSoft blog, and the article was called "To ESB or Not to ESB." And then it went and talked about, do you use a hub and spoke? Do you use an ESB? And it actually made the point that sometimes you really don't need the ESB. If you're just talking to one or two other systems and they're all speaking the same language, don't waste the money on setting up an ESB, because you have to create connectors and all that. Sometimes there's a reason to do point-to-point, which actually segues very nicely into our next topic, which is point-to-point versus ESB. And we are on Waruna, me, and Nicole. So Varuna, what do you tell us about when might you want to use point-to-point instead of ESB?
Yeah, I think when your integration landscape is very simple and you have one or two transactions, you can use point-to-point integration. But when you have multiple systems that you want to integrate with and different formats and a lot of conversions, then you would go with the ESB. In point-to-point, it's very hard to maintain, and it's not very scalable. So one system would call the other system directly, like for example, a web application can call Salesforce APIs directly. It's point-to-point. But when you have ESB, you have I think as we talked on the previous slide, it's a central bus, so you can have a centralized logging, centralized place to track of all your transactions going back and forth. And so it's more scalable, and it supports multiple adapters. And also it supports, scalability.
Very cool. Yeah, and I guess just to what I had already said earlier, sometimes you don't always need an ESB because it's more overhead than you need. However, the beauty of ESB is, even if you're only talking to 3 systems, but let's say those 3 systems all have different data formats, then you might want to consider using the ESB and installing what they call connectors or adapters to translate your data into those different formats for each of the downstream systems. And then an ESB might make sense at that point. Nicole, anything else to add?
Nope, I had the same couple of bullet points. It's just that, it's there if you only have a few systems to integrate with, and that, it doesn't scale as well as ESB.
Okay, cool. All right, so the next three are Terry, Svatka, and Jeff, and we're talking about Lightning Connect versus Salesforce to Salesforce. And Terry will lead us off.
All right, so Lightning Connect would be if you want to access external data within Salesforce, maybe from like a legacy system, where Salesforce to Salesforce is, if the data is not in a Salesforce org, you're not going to be able to leverage a Salesforce to Salesforce type connection. But in both scenarios, it's leveraging information from another data source. So either an external with Lightning Connect or another Salesforce org with Salesforce to Salesforce.
Okay, Svatka, what do you want to add?
Lightning Connect and Salesforce Connect, they're synonymous, right? Are they the same thing?
Lightning Connect and Salesforce Connect, yes, but this is Lightning Connect versus Salesforce to Salesforce.
Right. So in terms of Lightning Connect, the connector itself, I believe, has a cost to it. Yes. It's using external objects, which means that the data doesn't reside in Salesforce. It can be searchable, updatable, viewable by users in Salesforce, whereas Salesforce to Salesforce, it actually replicates the records from the connecting org, and it is set up record to record, like you have to enable the record to record, and then it actually replicates data to that destination org as well.
Nice. Jeff, anything else? Jeff, you might be muted if you're talking.
Yep, I was. So Lightning Connect is single direction. So you're going from a source to a target, whereas Salesforce to Salesforce could be set up for bidirectional. You need to have authorization for Lightning Connect. So you need to set up either OAuth or named login, because you're basically keep going back to the source system in order to pull data. Salesforce to Salesforce is more that pub sub. So you publish, and then someone can come subscribe. So there's no real login information that's associated with that connection. And everybody else covered the other items that I had.
Okay. Anything else from the group on Lightning Connect versus Salesforce to Salesforce? Okay, well then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So Lightning Connect, guys, yeah, the very important thing is external objects. That is exactly used. And Salesforce to Salesforce, you're actually transferring data. So it's actually going to be part of your storage, data storage. But Lightning Connect, external objects don't count against that. It does make sure that whatever the external system that you're connecting your external objects to, the data is coming in real time, so your data is always up to date, and that connection is always there. Salesforce to Salesforce, anything that changes in Salesforce, if it changes.
Surabhi, can you mute? I think your mic is an echo.
Yeah, thank you. If anything changes in any of the systems, you can that is replicated into other system. It's either create, update. You can choose exactly what objects you want to sync, what fields you want to include, and everything. In Lightning, again, that's the same thing. You can choose exactly what kind of data you want to bring on into Salesforce external objects and what fields you want to sync. So yeah, that's the couple of things there.
Okay. Cool. Okay, and then who are we? Svatka, were you on Lightning Connect too?
Yes, I was just
Okay,
thinking
so
back.
we're back to Surabhi, Waruna, and myself for the next topic. And the next topic is Lightning Connect versus SOAP or REST callout. So Surabhi, we'll let you start.
Hello, can you guys hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, so with Lightning Connect, you guys already mentioned on what it is. I'll just add that it requires OData as a format, and SOAP versus REST callout. I'm not sure here how would we differentiate actually.
Okay, Waruna, what do you think? When would you use Lightning Connect to access data from another system versus when would you want to use a callout instead to get that data?
Well, a Lightning Connect is a kind of you can use configuration to do that call out. But SOAP calling a SOAP REST call out needs you need to call a from my experience at least calling a Apex class to do that call out. So it's more there's more coding involved on that section. But Lightning Connect is easy to configure and set it up. That's what I know as of right now, but not more details. Not much details.
Okay, and isn't it because Lightning Connect uses external objects, you can query on the data, can you report on external objects? I know you can do like lookups and stuff with them.
Yeah, you can report.
Okay, and you can report, which you can't really do when you're doing callouts. So that would be another advantage of Lightning Connect. Anything else on Lightning Connect versus SOAP or REST?
One of the big things, because there's overhead with Lightning Connect, because of all those things like you're talking about, reports, external objects, and so forth, it runs a lot slower than doing just a direct call out. So you might want to think, depending on the volume of stuff, if you want a little bit of information, you may be better off with a call out to do it versus the overhead that's associated with Lightning Connect.
Yeah, I seem to remember way back when I did the Trailhead module on this, back when it was called Salesforce Connect, they said that it's basically best if it's external data that you want to access infrequently.
Yeah.
And not in large volumes. So it's good for an occasional lookup, but not if you're like constantly querying it.
I mean, if you think underneath, it's actually making a REST call to go get the updated data each time you need it. So depending on the amount of stuff you're trying to get, that could actually be a fairly large call to, especially if you're talking reporting, that could be very big. So you're really doing the rest behind the scenes. You just have some overhead that goes with it, and then you don't have to manage all those calls yourself.
Right, and the admin doesn't care that there's calls happening. It's all point and click configurable, so it makes admins happier.
Yes.
So
and
guys,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I've a question on Lightning Connect. So I've just used Lightning Connect in terms of never done it for a client, or so to say, in real project. I've just done the Trailhead badge and just those practice kind of thing around it. But is Lightning Connect easy enough for any kind of system that supports the OData format? Is it like like they say as documentation or as part of the marketing material? Or because the kind of feedback that I'm getting is Lightning Connect is quite limiting. It's only a couple of systems, and if those systems they actually match exactly to the standards, then only if anything goes a little bit to the side, then Lightning Connect falls flat on its promise. Anybody has any experience around that?
So I'm in the middle of implementing two systems right now using it, and there are limitations. In terms of the OData, I'm doing Salesforce to Salesforce. I'm just doing it a different way, so both things are there. But there are things like Jitterbed that you can set up OData sources to, let's say, databases. So you got SQL or Oracle and you don't have it, there are tools like Jitterbed or some others that you could get to put an OData front end on it. Now, we could spend a lot of time on this. Some of the quick restrictions, you can set up like custom fields to do relationships, but you have to be very specific on that type of relationship, and it has to be a unique external ID in order to link. So it just can't be an external ID, which you could normally link on. It has to be a unique one. So that's provided us some limitations. And you can't do search filters. So when you're used to, like setting up relationships and saying, I only want to show things that match a certain criteria, that's not something you can do with the external data because it's actually having to reach out and get it. So it becomes more difficult.
Got it. So as far as if the other system kind of supports OData, then it's not a problem. You
It's
can
pretty straightforward,
go ahead and connect. Right. Okay. Got it. But if it's not, then you still have to pay for Lightning Connect, and then you also have to pay for something like Jitterbit to kind of put that OData interface in front of your external system.
Exactly. So it can become costly.
Got it. That answers my question. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. And who are the 3 people on this slide? Because I've completely lost track again. My short-term memory sucks this time of night. What I have is Nicole, Terry, and Svatka, and I don't know if that's for the next group or if that's the group that just spoke.
Next group.
Okay, so Nicole, Terry, and Svatka are the next group. All right. So let's move on then. Nicole, Terry, and Svatka, you are on outbound messaging versus doing a manual SOAP call out.
Okay, do you have a preference who goes first?
Nicole, I think you should go first.
Okay. let's give me the easy stuff, and then everybody else who actually done integrations can do some of the more challenging things. Okay, so I had the differences between outbound messages and SOAP callouts is outbound messages. You're really using those with Salesforce workflows, and so that is going to be triggered when an event occurs. So like when a record changes. And that can push the field with the field values to an external source. And then I had for your SOAP call out, and I may be wrong here, but that you can batch more than one message together for a SOAP call out. So I'm not sure if that's true, but that is what I found. So I've seen that as like, this is outbound messages is something that's set off by workflow. It's a one time, it's a one at a time thing where it's like, SOAP is something that you can trigger in another way through an Apex class, and then you could batch it as well.
Okay. Terry, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so outbound messages, they could batch as well. I believe it will hold, I think, 100 messages, I think was what it was, per outbound message if it needed to. So they will be in a queue, and it will process those accordingly. I believe that's right. It is one way, so I'm not going to get anything back other than the acknowledgement of receipt with the outbound message. Where and correct me here if I'm wrong, but I was thinking with the SOAP API, I could actually get a response back from that. I'm not totally sure on that one. I agree with Nicole there that the SOAP is call out. It would be done via Apex, so that is definitely coding required for that piece, where outbound messaging is all declarative.
Okay, Svatka, what else do you want to add?
Terry just took half of my stuff, but click versus code is the #1 thing about messages versus SOAP callouts. One thing that I do have on my notes here is that if you need a specific message markup, you want to go with outbound with web service callout versus outbound message, because that one has predefined specific format. Additionally, if you write any code, there's a maintenance. So going forward, you're going to have to maintain it, and so that's one of the shortfalls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is it also safe to say that an outbound message can only involve data from a single object? Where I would assume with the SOAP call out, because we're writing that code, we could include additional more than one object in the message that we're sending.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of those key things about outbound messaging, single source, single object per message. And the other thing to remember about outbound messages is that you only get the most recent change. So if you make, let's say, a change on an account record, and you change that field and that message is sitting in queue, and then you go and change that same field again, and the first message hasn't sent yet, then the message will only send the most recent value of the field change. So you can't use it for like audit history because it's not going to send, it might not send any intermediate changes through depending on how the timing works out with the message queue.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to send anything like a deleted record via outbound message either.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, so outbound messages is only on create or update, not on delete. So very cool. All right, Jeff, Atul, and Surabhi are our next three, and they will tell us about what is meant by data layer integration versus application layer integration. And sometimes there's a fuzzy line between those two. So help us explain the differences. Let's start with Jeff.
Great, let me do it. I mean, the data layer is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of things we've talked about with the SOAP and REST, where you're taking data, moving it to other systems, or allowing other systems to actually access the data. Application layer, I went out and actually tried to look at a bunch of things around this. I found some things around the different layers being identity layer, data layer, process layer, and then presentation layer. So I don't know if the application becomes more like the presentation layer. And I'm seeing what notes I put. For instance, like mashups and canvas are things that we can present. So we can have either apps inline or the way things process, which I think becomes more of the application layer, not necessarily data. It may access pieces of the data, but the way we're displaying, the way we're guiding people through the operation, you know, we're integrating more at that top layer. And what else do I have here? That's all I've got on the application piece. I think the data is pretty straightforward. It's more understanding the application layer.
Okay. Atul, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, so about the data layer, yeah, Jeff is absolutely, I'm going to agree with him. It's pretty straightforward. It's just copying the data from one system to another. Simple as that. There's no as such process involved. It's just copy paste, right? So any process that might have happened, it has happened, and you just take the data from one system and just copy it over to other system. There's no as such process involved in between, apart from transferring the data over. Application layer, it's you can say, you know, it's a transcendence of application process between two different systems. So let's say you've got two objects in Salesforce. One object's you know, if something happens on one object, it updates the other object. So that's like happening within the application, right? So but we are talking about, since we're talking about integration, think about there's something happening in one system and it goes ahead and affects the other system, right? So it's not exactly a copy paste. So for example, you know, you kind of create a case in Salesforce and it goes ahead and, you know, hits another system and kinds of you know, create a Jira ticket or something like that in another system, right? So that's not exactly a copy paste, but it's actually two systems kind of part of the same process and flowing, and the data is flowing logically, and exactly not the same kind of data is being copied. There's some transformation that is happening in between. So two systems kind of part of the same application. That's where the application layer integration kind of comes in. Data layer is basically simple as that. You know, just take the data and copy it over.
Okay. Surabhi, anything to add?
So I'll just add that on data layer integration, there can be the initial data migration. That is just a one-time data. Then if you're moving from one application to another, and another can be the ongoing data integration, which can be like ongoing depending on, you know, the process that we have. It can be an ongoing data integration that we have been talking about, the whole SOAP, REST, and all of those things. And yeah, as Jeff mentioned, on application, I have like the presentation layer, which is the canvas and the mashup. So anything that doesn't really require any data, but more at a presentation layer, then we would call it, I guess, application integration.
Okay. The reason I put this slide on here is one of those Salesforce University videos. It was a knowledge check, and it said, a system needs to send data to system B when something on system A changes. And is this a data integration or is this a logic integration? And I said, well, it's a data integration because it's sending data to another system. But I was wrong. And the system said, because this process is triggered by a change, it's therefore considered a logic integration. Now, I don't know if they're going to waste an exam question on asking whether something is data or application integration, but you might need to know the difference just in reading the question. Okay, that brings us to the last question, and Waruna, me, and Nicole are up on this one, and it's partial backup versus incremental backup, which sound very similar. So what the heck are the differences? Waruna, you're up first.
Well, I can take on the incremental backup. So for incremental backup, is usually you had tracked the delta changes from the last time you took a backup. So for that, you keep track of for each and every record, you keep track of the last modified or created date. So based on that, you can look at the last backup date and then pull only the changes, which is called the delta changes. So it reduces. It takes the effort of taking a full backup. Partial backup, I would let someone else speak on that.
Okay, well, I'm up next, so I guess I'll speak on partial backup. Partial backup is taking a subset of the data. For example, I only want to back up my accounts, or I only want to back up the contact names and emails that have been changed in the last 30 days. It's not exactly a delta because I'm setting a specific timeline for what I want, or maybe I'm only picking certain fields or certain objects out of my backup, regardless of whether they've changed or not. And that's the difference between partial and incremental. And Nicole, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
I was going to add that a partial backup could be a really good thing for like archiving purposes. So if you want to archive, all of your accounts that haven't had an opportunity in 5 years, you can do that. And that will kind of help, lower the amount of data storage that you're using within the system. So that might be a part where you would want to, or a time where you would want to use a partial backup instead of an incremental backup. I had to think both also may lack related information because you're not getting a full picture of the database. You're only getting pieces of it. And then I also had, if you're using incremental backups as a way to potentially restore your data if something goes wrong, it can give you an incomplete picture. So that's one of like the downsides of using an incremental backup as a backup strategy, but it's faster. So yeah.
Very cool. And sorry, go ahead.
Nothing. I said that's all I had.
Okay. Miracle of miracles. I didn't think we were going to get through all these slides, but guys, we got through all the slides. So awesome group we got here. The study schedule this week is get ready to take your exam. If you haven't scheduled it, I encourage you to schedule it because that will force you to study those final areas that maybe you need to brush up on while the information is still fresh. Those of you that prepared notes ahead of time for this, and I know it sounds like at least a couple of you have, please post them in the Session 7 folder, and that way the rest of us can peek and take our own notes off your notes. For those of you who are taking the exams, good luck.
Yeah, good luck to everybody, and thanks for getting this started. I think it was a good group of people helped us get through all this.
Yeah, and please post however you do on the exam, post your experience in the architect community so that others can learn from it and kind of find out, what's good, what's bad, what was unexpected. It seems like no matter what I study, some question comes out that's a complete curveball and was nowhere in anything I studied. It just happens, and I've just accepted the fact that it's going to happen. So when those curveballs come, take note of them and then tell the rest of us so they won't be a curveball for the next person taking the exam.
Okay,
and with that, yeah.
Are you going to keep the Slack channel and the Google Drive folders up and running?
Yes, yeah, I'm going to leave the folders out there. Yeah, we've got links posted to them all over the architect community, so yeah, they're not going away anytime soon.
Cool.
And I just posted a document. So I took all kinds of notes through all of this. So I just posted a large piece out there. Apologize that it came from a OneNote, which is where I normally take notes, so the links aren't really active in there. There are links throughout that I used for this, but unfortunately, we're probably going to have to type them in unless I can figure out a way to get text out of this large piece. But there's kind of a page on every. That's why I knew we had some new topics, because there were things I hadn't done notes on because I hadn't seen it. So
Yeah, the beauty of live documents.
that's why there's pages missing. But hopefully this becomes useful. I just got a boatload of information there on different things.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been an awesome group. Good luck on your exams. Please do post your feedback in the architect community. Let us know how you did, whether it was a pass or a not pass, whether it was a pass or will pass next time. I'll say it that way. So,
That's a better way, yeah.
And good luck, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording. And I'm going to call this study group done. So have
and Natalya, a big thanks to you for putting in the effort and the time and the energy that you put in. That's a lot of time and energy that you put into this group. Thank you very much. We were all slacking off and you were there, right?
I think I was slacking off right along with you.
Right.
Well, thank you guys. You guys are part of the reason that I kept this thing going, because knowing that somebody's going to be expecting me to have content every week is what made me actually generate content every week.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
All right.
So.
Good night, guys.
Good night.